On 9/11, 15 years ago, Captain Charles Burlingame III, pilot of American Airlines Flight 77, he and his co-pilot were murdered in the cockpit as the enemy took over that jet and flew it into the Pentagon. He was a great hero, as so many were on that day and so many are today. His little sister, Debra Burlingame, has become one of the most important patriotic voices about that day and the war we're fighting against the enemy in America. She will be our special guest tonight. Join us.
American 77, your departure frequency will be 125.05, runway 30, clear for takeoff.
555, clear for takeoff, runway 30, American 77.
American 77, Dallas departure, radar contact, climb and maintain 5,000.
5,000, American 77.
American 77, Dallas approach, climb maintain 17,000.
7,000, American 77.
American 77, contact Washington Center 133.27.
3327, American 77, thanks for getting. Washington, American 77, passing 25.1, 270.
American 77, climb maintain flight level 290, sir.
290, American 77.
American 77, turn 20 degrees right, vector for your climb.
20 right, American 77. Send American 77, you got the request for 350 as the final.
American 77, roger. Maintain flight level 350, I'll show that as your final.
350 for final, American 77, thank you, sir.
American 77, climb and maintain flight level 350.
3350, American 77.
American 77, clear direct Falmouth.
Direct Falmouth, American 77, thank you, sir.
American 77, Indy. American 77, American Indy. American 77, American Indy, radio check, how do you read? American 77, American, radio check, how do you read?
This is Caicos.
This is Henderson, American 77. I don't know what happened to him. I'm trying to read
Heading you now for Sterling 937.
Looked like he took a turn to the south, and now I don't know what altitude he's at or what he's doing. Last night he was heading towards Falmouth at 35.
Well, just let me know.
Okay, I'll try to get a hold of him. Thanks.
On the morning of 9/11, it took hijackers 12 minutes to take control of the cockpit of my brother's plane. It took 6 minutes for them to kill my brother and his co-pilot. 6 minutes in a closed cockpit is a very long time. I am not the sister of a victim. I am the sister of a fighter.
Debra Burlingame, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
When you hear this involving your brother, who's the pilot of American 77, how often have you heard that?
I only heard it once before, and I didn't make it to the end. I had to stop. I didn't hear all of the traffic control at the end there.
It's brutal. It's crushing. What do you think about it now, almost 15 years later?
It really takes me back. And it takes me back not to all the aftermath of that day, but to Chick. And to the horrible thing that he had to experience in that cockpit. Chick was he was a fighter pilot. He was a Naval Academy guy. He was very good at what he did and very professional. And knowing that he was fighting for his life, what he would have been thinking of was his airplane and his passengers, because he would have known that if they got control of the cockpit, those passengers were doomed. Chick actually talked about a scenario like this. In 1999, he went to LAX airport after a layover with my brother Brad. The airport made him go through security. Chick put his crew kit, he had an employee badge, and he was ticked about it. And Brad said, after they got through, "Why? You could have a gun or a knife in your cockpit, in your crew kit, Chick." And he stopped walking, and he turned to me and said, "Brad, I'm the pilot of the plane. I don't need a gun or a knife. I have a 200,000 pound airplane with 50,000 pounds of jet fuel. Essentially, I'm flying a missile." Mm-hmm. So he knew the danger of bad actors having control of his plane. Even if it was a so-called conventional hijacking, he knew that his passengers were in grave peril. And I do believe that would have been the last thing he would then on his mind when he was fighting to stay alive.
And that's the jet that struck the Pentagon and had a lot of other people on there who people know and don't know. But let me ask you this. Tell us a little bit about your brother, how you grew up, your family, and so forth. You went into the Navy, and
Right.
Tell us about it.
Well, we were a military family. Chick was the oldest of 4 kids, all of us born in different places because my dad moved from duty station to duty station, and the Air Force sent the families with them usually. Chick was, as the son of an Air Force guy, he loved airplanes. First picture we have of him is him holding, he must have been 3, holding an airplane, toy airplane. He built his first plane when he was 6 years old by himself. He wanted to surprise my parents, so he found some lumber behind our house in England, and he built a plane with, the wingspan was bigger than his height, and he painted USA on the wings. It was a 4-engine prop plane because he wanted to be a military pilot. He was a patriotic kid, Eagle Scout, always wanted to go to a service academy, went to Naval Academy, which was okay with my dad because my father was World War II in the Navy, Pacific Theater. And then his hope was to go on to jet school. He did get assigned to aviation, and he did get jets and tactical jets, and had an 8-year career in the Navy, or 8-year active, another 17 as a reservist. Volunteered for the Gulf War. But Chick personally was kind of a legend in his own family because he was a real superstar to us.
A John Wayne type.
Well, he was, people say, oh, he was cocky. He was confident. I never heard him brag, ever. But he was confident about what he did. One of the biggest thrills of my life as a teenager, or I must have been in my, I'm not sure, when he was in jet school, and he flew a hop, cross-country hop in an A4 or an A6, landed it in at El Toro Marine Base. And when he was leaving, he put my parents and my brothers and I at the end of the runway. He said, "Go down there." And he took off, kept the plane low, and when he got just before us, he went straight up. He was like almost a movie star to his own brothers and sisters.
How old was he when he passed away?
He died. He died the day before he would have turned 52. His birthday was September 12th.
He have his own family?
He had one daughter who was 27 on 9/11, and a grandson. She had a 4-year-old. I say had because Wendy, his daughter, died just after the 5th anniversary in a fire.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so her son was 9 then, Chick's grandson. He's 19 now.
Is he doing okay?
He's had some rough times, and
You lost your mother,
yes,
your grandfather.
yes, and he's been a bit of a lost boy, but he's a great kid, great kid.
Now, you've been one of the most outspoken advocates, not just for the 9/11 families, but for this country, that this country needs to wake up and defend itself against this threat. And I want to get into that in great detail. But before I do, I want people to know a little bit about you. Obviously, you were the sister of Chick Burlingame. By the way, where did he get that nickname from?
Well, my grandfather, our grandfather, was Charles F. Burlingame Sr. His nickname was Charlie. My dad was Charles F. Jr., and his nickname was Chuck. And so they wanted to give him something that was different. No one was going to call him Charles. That's
Right.
like a royal name, right? They tried Chad. They thought it sounded too fake, and no offense to Chads out there. But they thought Chick just fit him.
Well, you know, if he'd been Jewish, they would have just called him Charlie. But, Now, I didn't know you were a producer. Well, you're a lawyer, that I knew. You were a producer at Court TV.
Right.
For a period of time. You've been involved also in some litigation and legal cases here and there, amicus briefs, giving input and so forth. You're prolific, or have been a prolific writer, op-eds and so forth. And I count you among my dear friends, even though we don't get to talk as much as I'd like to, because our lives are just so busy. You're a board member of the 9/11 Memorial Foundation. You're founder of the 9/11 Families for a Safe and Strong America. What should people remember? What should they take away from 9/11? The grief, the hardship, which is horrific. And those of us who are my age and your age, it really is with us. I mean, everybody remembers where they were when this happened. When that first plane went into that tower, I mean, at least everyone I was with thought it was an accident. Then the second one was, okay, we're under attack. And then we hear about the plane that hits the Pentagon and the one in Pennsylvania, and maybe there are other planes out there and so forth and so on. What should we take away from all this?
Well, the first thing that people remember, aside from the chaos and the harrowing pictures, is how we all felt, the emotional impact of this. Yes, the fear. Yes, the anger. There's a lot of talk about the unity we felt then. And I think that's important because we don't feel that very much now. And I know you're not big on unity, but I think it's important for us to endeavor to listen to each other, okay? And we were listening to each other back then. My favorite emotional response to 9/11 is anger. That's the one I don't want us to forget, because anger can be very productive. And there's some things we shouldn't forgive, or we certainly shouldn't forget. We had a moral rectitude back then that we don't seem to have today. And but it's possible. It's possible. We should remember how resilient we were. I mean, people forget about the Wall Street story. The markets were down. The commodities markets were in disarray. They hit the World Trade Center because they were trying to make a message, and they really wanted to hurt our economy. And those guys and gals down there said, no way. And they got those markets back up in a matter of days. It was personal to them. And they were working out of makeshift computers in apartments. And that's the kind of banding together, we can do this, that we must remember we're capable of. The other more lasting message that is relevant today is this issue of who's our enemy? Who did this? Why did they do it? How do we defeat them? And should we be telling the truth about this to the American people? It's almost mind-boggling to me that we would ask that question. But we need to tell the truth about this. There's going to be a vote in Congress today on a bill to allow 9/11 families to overcome this idea of sovereign immunity to sue Saudi Arabia. Now, those 28 pages that everyone hears about, those were suppressed because it would be embarrassing to our allies, and embarrassing to our allies that we needed when we were prosecuting these wars, if nothing else, for a military staging area. Let's remember that the Saudi Arabian government put out a statement saying if you release those 28 pages, they intimated that there would be financial consequences, economic consequences to our country. They were released and there were none. Okay? I think we have to have a leadership strong enough.
But let me just, so you support the families being able to sue Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely.
Because this is a big debate going on.
There is a big debate going on about, they've crafted that bill in a way to say that, you know, if there's evidence, you have to meet a threshold of whether or not there's evidence to show that a government participated in a terrorist attack. It's a high threshold. It can't be, you know, sure, people can try to use it abusively, but they already do that with world court type stuff. I mean, they're going to do that anyway. But we lifted sovereign immunity on Libya after Pan Am. I mean, it's not as. I think they're overblowing the negative consequences. And I cited this 28 pages because Saudi Arabia, yes, a very wealthy place, but they don't stand alone in that region. They need us as much as we need them.
Just circling back, do the 9/11 families, first of all, 9/11 families, that phrase, is that an okay phrase? Does that mean something? Do you like, I don't mean like, is it okay when you say 9/11 families?
Yes, it is. The hard thing about it is there's so many of us. But interestingly, after 15 years, that phrase hasn't been diluted. I think the press, the commentariat, the political activists on both sides of the aisle, they've kept that phrase meaningful and current. They've respected it for the most part. And I think it's important because I don't know that I have funny feelings about saying, oh, we have moral authority, because you can be a complete jackass and you shouldn't necessarily have moral authority because you had lost a loved one on 9/11. But I'm pretty proud, for the most part, of the way the 9/11 family community has conducted themselves. And so I think they've earned the respect all these years later.
You had a lot of young men and women right after 9/11 who joined the military. And they wanted to punish this enemy. And I know a number of those families too. These Gold Star families too. Is there communication between Gold Star families and 9/11 family members, or is that sort of just, it depends on the individuals and so forth?
There is communication. Formally, there's a great brotherhood and sisterhood between the first responders and the military community. They are like this. They attend each other's events. They support each other's charities. They run in each other's races. There's been tremendous. They view each other as kind of cut from the same cloth. It's sort of a natural affinity between those folks. On the civilian side of 9/11, there's, again, support for each other's charities. 9/11 families, no matter what they feel about the politics of this stuff, adore the military and the sacrifices, have great respect for the sacrifices they've made. I personally, because I come from a military family, and Chick was staunch military. He volunteered for the Gulf War while he was a pilot at American. And had some of his peers that graduated in his class at Annapolis stayed all through, and they were at the height of their careers on 9/11. I think 3 of them with the 5th, 6th, and 7th Fleet. We were in charge of them. One was in the Joint Chiefs. One went to NORAD. I mean, so that connection. So I felt like I owed them something, and I wrote to some of the Gold Star families. I made a point of looking up where they were, how I could reach them, and I sent them letters. Because some of these, mostly men, died very young. They were 19, 20, 21, in the prime of their lives. And I wanted them to understand that they didn't die in vain, what I said to all of them was that, some people go all their lives and never know what it's like to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They could be hugely successful in life, monetarily or otherwise, and they never feel that sense of inner satisfaction that they were doing something that meant more, and their sons or daughters did. I wanted them to remember that.
Let me ask you this. How did you first hear that that was Chick's plane?
I got a phone call from my brother Brad. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I had just moved there to start my own company. And I had already gotten a call. I was awakened because there's a 3-hour time difference from my brother Mark's wife, who said, "Deborah, get up and turn on the television." The second plane had just gone in. That's 8:46. Chick's plane cockpit hadn't even been breached yet. My brother Brad was calling me. He and I had been roommates in New York City back when we were in our 20s, and so we considered New York we felt very close to it. I lived there for almost 30 years and raised my daughter there, so it was very upsetting to see those images. And we were on the phone with each other. Chick's birthday was the next day. We expected him in Los Angeles that night. Brad and he were going to go to an Angels baseball game. So we were literally watching the coverage, talking to each other, Brad and I. And then we'd hang up to do something and call each other. And then I got another call from Brad, and he was simply screaming. I knew it was Brad, but I couldn't understand a thing he was saying because he was screaming. And I said, "Brad, I don't understand what you're saying. You have to slow down. You have to slow down." And what he was saying was, "It's Chick. It's Chick. It's Chick," crying and screaming. And what he had been told, and what he told me, that Chick's plane was the aircraft that hit Tower 2. There was so much confusion that day because of the transponders, the radio signals, radar signals coming off those planes, that they didn't know where some of these planes were for a long period of time. They got a radar visual on Chick's plane heading that way. Anyway, the time signals, because they were so close together, were messed up. So all this video that I'd been watching for an hour, I now realized, or thought, was my brother's own plane, because he flew 757s, 757s, and 767s, both. And that was a big one, 757. But it was just an out-of-body, strange, heartbreaking, where your emotions are on overdrive. Absolute, you almost become dizzy. We didn't find out until, I would say, around 2 in the afternoon later, just from watching CNN, that Chick's plane, in fact, was the one that hit the Pentagon. And then that brought a flood of more memories, because Chick had worked at the Pentagon, my father had worked at the Pentagon. That plane flew over Arlington, where my parents had just been both buried there. All our years of living in Washington, it was like he'd flown into our own backyard. Then we found out some 14 guys in the Naval Command Center who had been Annapolis grads. It was just getting hit, sucker punched again and again and again all day. And it went on like that for quite a while.
You get back to the Pentagon much?
I go every year to the anniversary, and I will just say, I hate going there. I know the memorial's there, and I'm very grateful that they built it and that they're remembered. but it's built right on the flight path where Chick's plane went in, right a few yards from where the nose hit. And it's Chick's most horrible day. And it's just, I don't like being there. I don't feel peaceful there. I do like visiting him at Arlington, though.
It's really a spiritual place, isn't it?
It is.
I walk the rows there by myself. I don't tell people, I just do it. And you look at those headstones, and you look at the age of these men and women, and you realize, despite all the attacks on millennials and so forth and so on, look at these young people, they volunteered. And there's so many of them. And I was there one day in honor of John Wroblewski's son, the Wroblewski, Sean and Wroblewski. And there was a lady there with a blanket in front of one of the headstones, and she brought a picnic lunch. It was the mother. And I went up to her, just gave her my best. She was having a picnic with her son. It's hard to watch that. It's very, very difficult. And then I watch the radicals in our country. I watch people complaining about their space, complaining about oppression, not standing up for the national anthem, multimillionaires, spoiled people, live in the lap of luxury. Most of them have never sacrificed for anybody or for anything. And unlike the left that says there's two Americas, there really are two Americas. I think there are people in this, and I want your opinion on this. You don't have to agree with me. I think there are people in this country who really understand. I'm not talking about the government, the country, that what a magnificent place this is and how blessed we are to be born here. Good God, we could have been born anywhere. And then there are people who respect none of it, through indoctrination or whatever it is, and who are constantly trying to tear it down and are being very successful at it. So you see these two Americas. What do you think?
Well, I think that having grown up in the 50s and the 60s, I mean, we lived in Washington when Martin Luther King was down the street giving the I Have a Dream speech. He was literally a few blocks away from us.
Amazing, yeah.
We lived in Washington when JFK was assassinated. We lived through a lot of history, my generation, the baby boomers. And we were taught differently, civics, history. There's a part of me that feels sorry for this guy, Kaepernick. One of the things I just told you I was trying to convey to those parents, those kids, young men, had an inner belief in something that made them want to go and volunteer and serve their country. I don't know that the kids today, or the young people today, are given a sense of being a part of something big and large that they can affect. And the left has fed them the idea that Occupy Wall Street is big and large, or this flag controversy, or somehow they're going to make the world a better place or the country a better place if they sit down on a bench during the Star Spangled Banner. I think that's young people yearning to be part of something big and important and bigger than themselves. That's the kindest interpretation I have of it. But I think it's true, because these young people aren't bad. They're just misguided. They're just misguided. One of my favorite books by Charles Murray is Coming Apart, where he goes into these comparisons from the 60s today about how our society and our culture has changed. Religiosity, work ethic, marriage. These are all indicia of how our society, the fabric of it, is just tearing apart. And they are the victims of this, or they are the consequence of this, is they're looking for something. And they're being, I don't want to say brainwashed, but they're being, I think, in some cases, deliberately misled. And in others, it's just ignorance. we've just abandoned our school system to the ideologues that don't appreciate this country. And, you know, we talk about the immigration issue. I have to take car services sometime when I'm coming in to do a TV appearance, and I remember there was a guy driving the car. He was an immigrant from Syria. He'd lived in this country for 13 years, and I asked him, he was listening to my phone conversation, talking about Islamism, all that, and he turned around and he said, I agree with everything you just said. So we kind of established where he was coming from, but then I said, you know, what do you think of America? And he said, I love this country. And I said, what do you love about it? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, freedom, freedom. He said it 3 times. He said, the American people have no idea how much freedom they have. And I think that's part of it. They have no idea. They haven't been taught the lessons. And, you know, here I'm in this studio, which is surrounded by all the, you know, the great founders. I was lucky. I won the parent lottery, Mark. My dad and mother took us to every important cultural museum, wherever we went. And I remember my dad lining us up in front of the National Archives. I was 8 years old, but I remember this. He was taking us to see the Declaration of Independence, his 4 little ducklings. And it was a long line. He was talking to us, you know, to keep us from being too crazy during waiting our turn. And I will never forget what he said. He said, the document you are about to see is more valuable than all the gold in Fort Knox. This was my parents inculcating the lessons of American history to us. Gave us an advantage. And I don't think the kids today are getting that. They just aren't.
I don't mean to be provocative, but the president's in Laos the other day.
Yeah.
The American people are lazy. The capitalist system, in essence, is a system that pollutes and denigrates. That the American people, they don't know who their neighbors are. They don't know anything about other countries. I mean, this is the commander-in-chief. And this isn't the first time he's done it. He does these sorts of things all the time. Now, young people listen to this, and hopefully they have parents that straighten them out. But the rest of the world listens to this. Now, Arlington, your family in the military, my family in the military. Mm-hmm. My father's 91 years old. He calls me every night after my radio show, and he says, almost every time, what the hell's going on in this country? Mm-hmm. For people in that generation to see this, the World War II generation, mm-hmm. the Korean War generation, this is heartbreaking, mm-hmm. absolutely heartbreaking what they see. And I think it's a little different than in the past because it is more ubiquitous to me. You got Hollywood, academia, the media, an entire Democrat Party, another party that seems impotent, incapable of addressing these things. So I think these are very, very troubling times, and I think a part of that is due, not exclusively, of course, it's bigger than that, but due to the President of the United States. Am I wrong?
Well, I think he's certainly ratcheted it up. It was going on before he entered office.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, he's not a root cause. He's symptomatic of something that's already happening. But you're quite correct. He's the President of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief. And the President of the United States has always been a role model. And so for him to go, and there's this thing, you don't go and denigrate your country abroad. That was one of the unwritten rules.
Seems to enjoy it.
I just think he's an ideologue. I think, I think he had a very odd upbringing. I read his books. I think he was an abandoned child, and he was ripe for the picking by the Frank Marshall Davis and the Saul Alinsky's of this world. With mixed racial at a time when it was not, it was still illegal in some states. So I think he has a troubled past, which made him quite ripe for taking on this kind of ideology. But frankly, what he says is shameful. And whether you come from a place of, whatever stratum of society you're in. I have a brother who's a heart surgeon. He's done over 6,000 open heart surgeries in his career. No one would call him lazy. But even at the very bottom, the families who are struggling to pay their bills and who aspire for their children to go to school. I saw a man hat in hand who was clearly a laborer trying to get his daughter into a private school in New York City. It's insulting to these people. It's insulting to Americans.
And you know what, Deb? When there's a natural disaster, Americans are the first one there. When there's a war, a righteous war, where people are being destroyed, there's genocide and so forth under the right commander-in-chief, America's there. Most Americans do practice the golden rule. Most Americans do want to get along regardless of race or background or anything of the sort. And, and most Americans want a leader who appreciates the American people. That is, appreciates them. But these are very, very troubling times. Let me ask you a question. I'm trying to think back, and I'm embarrassed to say this. I don't remember how we first met. Do you remember how we first met?
I didn't either, but my husband, when we were driving
Bob.
here,
Yeah.
my husband Bob, my dear Bob, he brought it up when we were in the car driving over here. He said, I remember I was coming home from work, and because he was a radio Levin devotee, he listened to you every night.
Good man.
And I was involved in a controversy. I think it was the International Freedom Center. He's nodding over there. So I was doing a lot of public speaking. It was all over the paper. I'd had a Wall Street Journal piece, and there was a lot of talk about it. And you started talking about it on the radio, and he was his mind was blown a little bit because suddenly this guy that he listens to all the time is talking about his wife. And then I called into your show. I had never met you, but I listened to you too, and you were talking about it, and thought, I want to get on the air and talk to him about this. So I wanted to leap in there because we were really trying to get. This was a PR war we were fighting, and I got on and we talked, and that's how we met. And you said, well, folks, when you were introducing me, our next caller, you never know who's listening. It's Debra Burlingame herself.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
About when was that?
That was 2005.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're fighting these battles all the time, aren't you? I mean, you've been testifying Capitol Hill, and it's developed into something even more. A lot of people turn to you now. They want to hear what you have to say. They want to read what you write about this bigger war that we have with Islamic radicalism. And I call it correctly, you don't have to accept my nomenclature, Islamic Nazism, because the similarities, in my view, are unequivocal. But that said, since 9/11, this enemy has gotten far more powerful. It has conquered territory. Its ability to get really advanced weaponry is clear. It even controls entire countries. When you look at Iran and so forth, it's a different type of Islam, but who cares?
Also wealthy.
Also very wealthy. And you've had a lot to say about this. And what do you think about our immigration policies? What do you think about the acceptance of refugees? Where's Debra Burlingame's head on this?
Well, I think we need to have a rational policy. Right now, there's nothing rational about it. And it hasn't been rational for decades, actually. But since Al-Qaeda and these kinds of, the suicide type attack, that's a lot harder to stop than people are trying to do something and get away clean. And entering this country by stealth. It's just suicide to not have control of your borders and to not have control of your visa system. Every other country in the world does it. And we comply without complaint. Why? Because it's rational. Why? I don't understand the people who are against this idea of a rational immigration policy. where we know who's coming in and we know who's going out. I don't understand. They don't have a problem with it overseas, but here. So I think there's a political component which actually has absolutely nothing to immigration itself. And by the way, immigrants want a rational policy too. Well, one of my nephews just married a Hungarian girl, and they're going through what's going to cost them a lot of money and probably, years and years. But with respect to the threat, we know that they're infiltrating, and they've been doing it for a long, long time. They're finding Islamic prayer rugs on the southern border, Islamic material on the southern border. They're catching people who are coming from terrorist-supporting countries. The question is, where are they getting the money to go from Bangladesh or Pakistan all the way down through South America and up through Mexico to come through our southern border? That's very worrisome to me, to think that someone's financing their way in. The country needs to address this.
And we have a lot of these, what they call OTMs, other than Mexicans, who are coming to this country from the Middle East.
Right.
And they're not being properly vetted. I mean, this isn't a put down, but when I worked at the Justice Department, we had a division called the INS, Immigration Naturalization.
Right.
So they changed the name now. And they moved it into this new department under Bush, the Department of Homeland Security. The Justice Department couldn't wait to get rid of the INS. And even though they're wonderful people who work there, it was like the place where you put people where you want to get them out of the Bureau of Prisons, you want to get them out of the Marshal Service. So again, it's not a put down. And then they move over to this new department that they developed. Now, having served 8 years in an administration, having served several years at the Department of Justice, there is no way that we know the backgrounds of people coming into this country from war-torn Syria. Syria doesn't tell us anything. They don't tell us who these people are. As a matter of fact, there was a story not long ago I discussed on the radio where for a fee, so-called civil servants in Syria will create backgrounds for people. They'll make money, they'll send them off to the United States, hopefully they think through the refugee program. Shouldn't at least there be a respite until we get our act together, until we know exactly what's going on? Isn't it the responsibility of government? There should be a radical notion to protect us. 9/11 was 19 people, 19 terrorists. That's all it took. And now they have our systems down even better. They know where we're soft and so forth and so on. So to me, this is just common sense stuff. And yet, 15 years after 9/11, common sense doesn't seem to work.
Because there are all these distractions. And in fairness, it's not just wanting the votes of immigrants on the Democrat side, on the Republican side. It's wanting the cheap labor. I maintain that we need to have some kind of employer sanctions. I mean, if we're really serious about it, we do that. It shouldn't be that difficult.
It's only voluntary now.
Well, we live in a digital age. We have to show ID for virtually anything when you're signing up for a job.
Except voting, we don't have to do that.
Right, except voting. But you have to give them your social security number or green card or some documentation. I think it's doable. Donald Trump is out there saying, with respect to some other issue, we can put a man on the moon. Why can't we do this? I think that's not a bad idea. I think we're capable of it. It's just the will. And I do believe we're going to get hit again.
We're going to continue our discussion with Debra Burlingame, part 2, as we go in depth more, not just about 9/11, but the consequences in the future of the country. I hope you'll join us.